Some nights feel ordinary. The kind of nights you don't think twice about. Dinner is served, voices fill the room, and life moves forward in the simplest, most familiar way. There's comfort in that routine. A quiet belief that nothing will go wrong. But sometimes, those are the nights that end in silence. On December 30th, 2000, in a quiet residential district in Setagaya, Tokyo, a family of 4 settled into what should have been just another peaceful evening. The house stood near a park, surrounded by trees and open space. It wasn't isolated, but it wasn't crowded either. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other, where children played freely, and where nothing violent ever seemed to happen. Inside that home lived the Miyazawa family. To anyone looking from the outside, they were just like any other family. Normal, quiet, uncomplicated. Mikio Miyazawa, the father, was known to be hardworking and calm. He didn't draw attention to himself. He simply focused on his responsibilities, his work, and most importantly, his family. His wife, Yasuko, brought warmth into their home. She was attentive, thoughtful, and deeply present in her children's lives. She created a sense of stability that made everything feel safe. Their daughter, Ninina, was lively and full of curiosity. She had that natural energy that filled a room without effort. Their son, Rei, was quieter, more reserved. He stayed close to what he knew, finding comfort in the presence of his parents and sister. Together, they formed something simple, but complete. There were no warning signs, no visible tension, no reason for concern. That evening, everything followed its usual pattern. Dinner would have been prepared. Plates arranged carefully on the table. Voices blending together in casual conversation. Maybe they talked about school. Maybe they talked about work. Maybe they talked about nothing important at all. Because most nights don't feel important while you're living them. As the hours passed, the house slowly grew quiet. Lights dimmed. Doors closed. The outside world faded into the background. One by one, they went to sleep. And somewhere in that silence, something changed. No one knows exactly when it happened. No one knows exactly how long someone had been watching, or waiting. But what we do know, is that sometime during that night, someone entered the house. There was no dramatic break-in, no shattered glass, no loud disturbance that alerted the neighborhood. Just presence. And then, movement. What happened next didn't unfold all at once. It happened slowly, deliberately. The first encounter likely came without warning. A sudden moment of confusion. A question left unanswered. Then fear. Then something far worse. Inside the house, the silence was broken. But not in a way anyone outside could hear. Room by room, something moved through that home. The kind of movement that doesn't rush. That doesn't panic. The kind that knows exactly where it's going. And one by one, everything began to fall apart. There were no signs that the family had time to escape. No evidence that they fully understood what was happening, before it was too late. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the house went quiet again, completely still. Hours passed. Outside, nothing seemed unusual. The neighborhood remained calm. The night passed like any other. But inside that house, something deeply unsettling was unfolding. Because the person responsible didn't leave. Instead, they stayed. At some point during the night, they moved through the home freely. They used the family's belongings. They opened drawers. They explored the space, as if they belonged there. And then, they did something no one expected. They turned on the computer. They accessed the internet, browsed through pages, spent time interacting with the outside world. While inside that house, everything had already changed. And it didn't stop there. At some point, they ate food from the kitchen, prepared or taken without urgency, without hesitation, as if time no longer mattered. This wasn't panic. This wasn't chaos. This was control. The kind of control that doesn't rush to escape. The kind that lingers. And then, they rested. Inside the same house. Inside the same space. Where the Miyazawa family had just spent their final night. By morning, the neighborhood began to wake. People stepped outside. Cars passed by. Life continued. But inside that house, the silence remained. When the family failed to respond, concern began to grow. At first, it didn't seem like much. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they were out. But as time passed, that feeling changed. Something wasn't right. Eventually, someone went to check on them. They approached the house, knocked on the door, waited. No answer. The house stood still, unresponsive. And when the door was finally opened, what they discovered inside would change everything. Because the Miyazawa family was gone, and the person responsible had left behind something far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Evidence. Not just a little, but a lot. Clothing, personal belongings, traces that should have made solving this case immediate. It was as if the killer hadn't even tried to hide, or worse, didn't feel the need to. Because what investigators were about to uncover next would make this case one of the most disturbing and mysterious crimes in modern history. And as they began to piece together what happened inside that house, one question became impossible to ignore. Why would someone do this and then stay behind? When investigators stepped into the Miyazawa home that morning, they weren't just walking into a crime scene. They were walking into something far more unsettling. At first glance, the house looked untouched. There were no signs of forced chaos, no overturned furniture, no indication of a struggle that had spilled out of control. But the deeper they moved inside, the clearer it became. This wasn't normal. The silence felt heavy, unnatural. And then they saw it. The reality of what had happened inside that house began to unfold. One by one, they confirmed the worst. The Miyazawa family was gone. All four of them. But it wasn't just the tragedy that shocked investigators. It was the condition of the scene itself. Because unlike most cases, this one was filled with evidence. Everywhere they looked, there were traces, fingerprints, DNA, clothing, personal belongings that didn't belong to the family. It was as if the person responsible had left behind a trail, almost intentionally, and that changed everything. Because in most investigations, the challenge is finding enough evidence. But here, the challenge became something else entirely. Why was there so much of it? As forensic teams began their work, they carefully documented every detail. Every item was collected, every surface examined. And very quickly, they realized something chilling. The person who committed this crime had stayed inside the house for hours. Not minutes, not a brief moment. Hours. The timeline suggested that after everything was done, the killer didn't rush to escape. Instead, they moved through the house calmly. At some point, they accessed the family's computer. Records showed that the internet had been used during the night. Pages were opened. Searches were made. And perhaps even more disturbing, they appeared to have spent time resting. Inside the house, investigators also discovered something else. The kitchen had been used. Food had been consumed. Not taken. Not grabbed in desperation. Eaten, deliberately. This wasn't the behavior of someone panicking. This wasn't someone trying to get away. This was someone who felt comfortable. And that detail alone changed the entire direction of the investigation. Because now, this didn't look random. It looked controlled. The question was no longer just who did this, but what kind of person would do something like this and stay behind. As investigators continued their analysis, they focused on the items left at the scene. Clothing became one of the most important clues. The garments recovered didn't match anything owned by the family. They appeared to belong to the killer, which meant this person had left behind part of their identity. DNA was extracted, carefully analyzed, compared against national databases. But there was no match. Not in Japan. That discovery led investigators to consider something new. What if the killer wasn't from the area? What if they weren't even from the country? The DNA suggested a possible foreign origin. A detail that complicated things even further. Because if the killer had left Japan, tracking them down would become significantly more difficult. But even with that theory, questions remained. Why this house? Why this family? There was no clear connection between the Miyazawas and any known suspect. No obvious enemies. No history of threats. They had lived quietly, peacefully, and yet, they had been chosen. Investigators explored every possibility. Was the house specifically targeted? Its location near the park raised questions. The area had fewer surrounding homes. Less visibility at night. Could someone have been watching from a distance? Studying the family's routine? Learning when they were home, when they slept, when the house would be most vulnerable. It was possible. But then another question emerged. If this was planned, why leave so much behind? Why leave clothing? Why leave DNA? Why use the computer? Why stay long enough to eat and rest? None of it made sense. And that's what made this case so different. In most crimes, even the smallest mistake can lead investigators to a suspect. But here, there were too many clues. And somehow, none of them led anywhere. As time passed, the case began to gain national attention. It became one of Japan's most baffling unsolved crimes. People followed the investigation closely, hoping for answers, waiting for a breakthrough. But the breakthrough never came. Years went by. New technologies were introduced. DNA testing improved. Databases expanded. Investigators revisited the evidence. Again and again. But each time, they reached the same conclusion. The person responsible was still unknown. The house itself eventually became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of unanswered questions. A place where something unimaginable had happened, and no one could fully explain why. For the community, it changed everything. The sense of safety that once defined the neighborhood was gone, because the truth was simple. Whoever did this had walked away. No arrest, no confession, no justice, just silence. And somewhere in the world, there is someone who knows exactly what happened that night. Someone who remembers every moment, every decision, every step they took inside that house. And for over 2 decades, that truth has remained hidden. So what really happened inside the Miyazawa home? Was it a carefully planned attack? A stranger who studied the family from a distance? Or something closer? Something that has yet to be uncovered? Because sometimes, the most disturbing part of a case isn't just the crime itself. It's the fact that the person responsible may never be found. And that means they're still out there, living a normal life, blending in, while the truth remains buried in the past. Let me know what you think, because cases like this don't just fade away. They stay with us. And sometimes, they remind us that not every story gets an ending.